And this is a quotation from Jo Phoenix, who's a professor of criminology. And she says that sex is the single strongest predictor of criminality and criminalisation. Since criminal statistics were first collected in the mid-1850s, males make up around 80% of those arrested, prosecuted, and convicted of crime. Violent crime is most commonly committed by males. This remains the case regardless of stated gender identity. And Ministry of Justice figures support that. They published figures in 2020 which showed that 98% of those prosecuted for sexual offences in England and Wales in 2019 were male. And Ministry of Justice data published in 2019 found that 98% of those convicted for sexual offences against children in 2017 were males. Now those kinds of percentages can be seen in all of the research. They vary to some extent, but always the percentage of sex offenders, whether it's against adults or against children who are male, are in the 90s and usually the high 90s in any research that I've looked at. A significant majority of those prosecuted for non-sexual forms of offences against the person are also men. And data published by the Office for National Statistics in 2021 for the 3-year period ending in March 2020 showed that 93% of those convicted of homicide were male. In England and Wales overall, males generally make up 95% of the prison population. So they're overwhelmingly the perpetrators of criminal offences, particularly violent and sexual offences. And the kinds of offences women tend to commit largely are much less serious offences against property, shoplifting, relatively minor offences. Majority of those who were sexually assaulted are female. And for the year ending March 20, the crime survey for England and Wales estimated that 618,000 women and 155,000 men aged 16 to 74 had experienced sexual assault, including attempted sexual assault in the previous year. That's a prevalence rate of 3 in 100 women and 1 in 100 men. Now they could well be underestimates. I generally thought that the amount of sexual violence that is occurring is underestimated by most of the measures of it. In research published in 2021, Karika Karsner and Professor Liz Kelly estimated that 15% of girls and 5% of boys experience some form of sexual abuse before the age of 16. And that sexual abuse, as the previous figures show, is overwhelmingly committed by males. And the picture is no different in relation to trans-identifying males. So figures presented by the Ministry of Justice in the case of Crown on the application of FDJ and Secretary of State for Justice, which I'll talk about a bit more later, suggested that data collected across the prison estate in March-April 2019 showed that 46.69% of trans-identifying male prisoners had convictions for sexual offences. By comparison, data for 2020 showed that fewer than 20% of male prisoners in the general male prison population were serving sentences for sexual offences. And on 14th of January 2022, the Justice Minister, Victoria Atkins, replied to a parliamentary question, and her reply indicated that the proportion of trans-identifying males in the prison estate who were currently serving sentences for sexual offences was in the region of 60%. The figures weren't precise because the Ministry of Justice wasn't certain how many trans-identifying males held in the women's estate at the time had convictions for sexual offences, but they believed it was fewer than 5. One of the reasons their figures are not accurate is because they don't keep accurate and detailed records of those with the GRC, Gender Recognition Certificate. So the majority of trans-identifying sex offenders are held in the male estate, but some are held in the female estate, and that varies at different points in time. There's a range of possible explanations for the high proportion of trans-identifying male offenders who've committed sexual offences. Those figures don't necessarily indicate that they are more likely to commit sexual offences than other males, generally, we don't know. But they do clearly indicate that many trans-identifying males retain male patterns of criminality.